listening to the Startup Scale Up Show, a podcast that inspires entrepreneurs to create meaningful businesses and pursue their passions. My name is Demi Samande and I am a furniture manufacturer, best known for documenting my move to Lagos, Nigeria for hopes of business opportunities. And I'm sitting down with entrepreneurs from across the continent to talk about their process, the lessons they have learned, and how to make real impact. Welcome to Susu. Billie is the founder and CEO of alGROWithm, who has built an incredible growth engineering company focusing on blitz scaling African tech startups and SMEs. She is one of the leading growth engineers in Africa, helping many African startups in Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, Ghana, and South Africa, with growing substantial market share within a short period of time. Her past work includes leading the growth as the VP of Growth Marketing at Jumia Nigeria. She has helped startups like Kudigo in achieving over 365% user growth and over 17,000 increase in monthly transactions within just 6 months. She has also supported Schoolable with setting up the growth infrastructure and launching their mobile app, acquiring over 3,000 app downloads within the first few weeks through her engagement as Founders Factory Africa. Hi, Billie.
Hi, Demi.
Welcome to Susu Podcast.
Thank you.
I can see that the rain didn't stop you this morning from getting in.
Never stops me.
Ah, wonderful. I know a few people complained about the rain today and it delayed them. I'm not going to mention any names though. But welcome.
Thank you.
It's fantastic to have you on the hot seat, on the chair, joining me today.
I'm very happy to be here, finally.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time, because I know you're super, super busy. Mm-hmm. Now, just going through your profile, obviously you and I, we've had numerous amounts of conversations in the past about what I do, what you do, what we do, and just the business sort of terrain in general. Now, I wanted to have you on Susu today because I think you're an absolutely phenomenal young lady that absolutely just tells that very inspirational story of grit, that idea that you can have excellence in what you do. And I think you're phenomenal at demonstrating that, by the way. I know we've spoken about this on and off camera.
Sure.
Just, I'm going off the conversation we're having today. And I think it's really a good opportunity to have you on to really talk about your journey. And before we delve into, the story of alGROWithm, I've been struggling this morning to say the word, but I got it out.
Doing great, don't worry.
Before we delve into the story of alGROWithm, I wanted us to sort of go back a little bit and just paint for us a picture of what your story, your childhood, your background was like, so that we could sort of set the scene for the journey.
Okay. Of course, well, Demola is my brother. You guys had a session with him previously.
Yes.
I grew up with 2 siblings, born in Nigeria, obviously. Grew up here, did primary school over here, and then eventually we moved to the UK where I did the rest of my education.
What did you study?
Yeah, so my first degree was computer science, and then...
Did you hear that, guys? Her first degree.
I don't have that many, just 2, come on.
Well, how many have 2? Excellence, please go ahead.
Well, yeah, so I did my first degree in computer science, and then I did a master's at the LSE in management science afterwards. And that's kind of where sort of my professional journey really started, right? So after I did my first degree, I worked as a software developer in the UK for about a year. And I just remember thinking the way the structure was set up in the company that I was working for, software developers could only code. You can only do coding, right? And I'm... as much as I'm able to execute on the detail, I also really like the opportunity to be able to solve problems, not just actually implement, right? So I didn't have the opportunity in that environment to say, okay, in terms of what we're building, it will be better suited to the need of the customer if we built it this way. I couldn't design the systems. I was only allowed to code. And so I spoke to my manager to try and to understand, what are the pathways that will allow me to be able to actually have that type of input. And it was like, okay, so I've been working here for 10 years. Maybe if you're at a manager level and wow. I just felt, another 10 years coding before I could have an opportunity to influence, like the solution design. I was like, no way, it's not going to happen. And then that's when I realized that, long-term software development wasn't enough for me because I couldn't, with that structure, I couldn't go beyond the coding. I could only, do what other people have built, even if I thought, it could be better. And so I left that. I came to Nigeria. I did my national service. Yes, I did that.
Well done.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a rude awakening into, what life in Nigeria was like.
Reinitiation back into Nigeria, I suppose.
Yeah, you can call it that. Because I came in, with all rosy eyeglasses, I'm here to change the world, to change Nigeria, and everything is perfect. I got a very rude awakening. So where did you do your youth service? I did it in Lagos.
Oh, that's not bad. Oh, come on. Everybody complains about everywhere else. But in Lagos, still close to home, I imagine. Were you commuting from home?
No.
Oh, okay. I did the full.
No.
Sorry.
We did it properly. I stayed in camp and all of that. It was a very interesting experience, but it really started to open my eyes to how things work in Nigeria and how things are in Nigeria. And I think I really needed that before, going into sort of the workplace and into the marketplace to actually get things done. So it was really interesting. I did my youth service and then I started trying to, I was working for different companies providing IT services, just freelancing. And then I just felt, this is all well and good. I have the skills to deliver these services, but there has to be more to this. I don't just want to do something small. I really want to do something big and impactful. And so that's when I started looking into sort of doing MBAs and things like that to take my knowledge to the next level and really understand how to build big businesses.
How old were you when you came back?
I'm not very good with dates and ages, so I'll answer that maybe afterwards. I have to do some calculations. But it was after my first degree. I worked for a year. So maybe around in my 20s.
Early 20s.
Yeah.
Okay. So you were at the time when you came back. Mm-hmm. Were you completely out of the loop with Nigeria? How long were you out? Were you away for?
For most of my life. So I left Nigeria around 10 years old. I did, secondary school. I did university. I did my master's there, and then I came back. And then you
came back.
Exactly.
So the youth service, I don't really know much about it, but I'm yet to do it. Yes, I am yet to do it. So what's the process like? You do that for how long? Is that a year? Or is it?
Yeah, so you do sort of, you go to a camp type thing for 3 weeks. And then you do marching, things that are so important to your life, like learning how to march.
Of course.
Obstacle courses and all sorts. So you do that for about 3 weeks, and then you're allocated to a company where you work for a year. And then every week you do community service, etc. So
I do know a little bit. I guess the reason why I'm asking, because I guess a lot of our viewers are from all around the world, and many are considering coming to Nigeria. And some of the questions I always get asked is things like this. What do you need to do when you initially first come back? Sure. What are the steps that you need to take? And youth service happens to be one of those steps.
It does.
Some have not quite gotten to that step yet, and we will. But if you're going to, obviously, you want to stay here long term, and you are open to the opportunities of perhaps working in a government role. It's just limited to government roles, or is there other?
Actually, if you're working for Nigerian companies as well, if you're not working as an expatriate, typically you have to demonstrate that you've completed NYSC as well. Yes. So it really depends on the circumstances. I have I don't really have an interest in going into government. I didn't think I have the skill set or the ability. But for me, it was...
you definitely have the ability, Billie. Let's say that
that's
much.
Debatable. That's
but
debatable.
You might not have the capacity to... Is it the capacity to withstand? I don't know. I don't know how we're going to describe it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely something that's advisable for somebody who's planning on perhaps staying here long term to possibly look into.
And for me, it was just also the opportunity to really understand Nigerian society. So if for nothing else, like nothing else aside from the work requirement part of it, or the the opportunities in government, if for nothing else, I think it's still important to just go through it, just to understand.
Imagine the experience would be
absolutely
quite
just to get a
life-changing
reorientation as to what the Nigerian society is like. And it also helped me incredibly with networking, because obviously I'd been out for quite a long time.
Yes.
And through that experience, I was able to meet new friends who had connections, and that was the beginning of my networking in Nigeria.
So it was definitely worth it then.
1,000,000%. Even though you definitely suffer, but you can control it and laugh about it later. But it was a great experience.
Okay, all right. So having done youth service, at that point, did you know that you wanted to be this, businesswoman extraordinaire? What was the plan? Were you winging it? Let's be honest. Were you winging it?
1,000,000%. So I just, I came back. I was like, okay, let's do youth service because everybody does it, and I can really start to meet people and understand how the Nigerian society works. And so I did that. And like I said, at that point, I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. I was just freelancing. Through those networks, I was able to get, a couple of big clients, and I was delivering IT services to them. But I felt like, there could be a lot more done with the proper structure and like a proper strategy. And I didn't just want to run a small business. I really wanted to take it a step further. And so I did that for a while. I started to learn the hard way as well about what it takes to do business in Nigeria.
What does it take to do business in Nigeria? It
takes a lot of grit, like you said, and also really understanding the behaviors of certain of business people or people operating businesses, especially when you're dealing with a service product. When you're dealing with physical products, is not, it's a little bit more straightforward. But when you're dealing with a service product, a lot of people expect you to deliver something, and then collecting payment becomes an issue. And so I learned the hard way quite a lot. And then I thought, okay, so I need to go back to the drawing board and really understand, okay, what do I want to do and how can I do it properly and scale it to a level where it's substantial and significant. And so, like I said, I started looking for sort of MBA courses and things that I could do.
Within Nigeria?
No.
Is it online? No.
I was looking at universities. I wanted to do a proper
okay. So
MBA.
You were thinking about leaving just as you had just arrived?
Yeah, I mean, I did a year. So that was, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was thinking about not necessarily leaving, but I just needed to acquire more and expertise. I just needed to deepen it. And I think this is something that I also sort of advise people who are younger than me and they're thinking about, what do they study, etc. Because I had a unique problem. I was good at lots of different subjects and I had so much interest in many different subjects. It was really difficult to actually hone one down and choose. Yeah. So what I found was a really killer combination is, starting with something technical or scientific that you can use to create value, right? So like computer science, you can actually create value from that. And then, once you've done that, if you're able to do a master's degree, so cover that with, business knowledge and understanding of the marketplace and economics, essentially. So yeah, I think that combination really works because then you can take that skill that you developed, create value, and then you now have the business knowledge or the economics knowledge to be able to
leverage it on top and do the add-ons with your client or potential clients.
Exactly. So, people who take, for example, business management for their first degrees, it's a lot tougher because then, there's no specificity where you can actually create value. So that's kind of how it all got started. I researched, I looked at various different MBA type programs. And I started looking at masters as well. And I figured actually, when I looked in detail at, the course structures, etc., the MBA was more about like practical things. But then I opted for like a LSE masters because it went beyond just the practical. It was really like digging into the science behind, the reasoning behind some of these theories and some of these structures that we have in business. And I thought that was a lot more powerful because in terms of application, like you can apply it to so many different
it cuts
scenarios.
Across industries then,
absolutely,
doesn't it?
because when you understand the science behind it, it's a lot easier to apply to any context rather than like just always following a framework of analysis. And but long story short, I did that master's and it was one of my best educational experiences.
Where did you go to do your master's?
London School of Economics, LSE.
Okay. So once you left LSE, did you come straight back to Nigeria or?
Of course not. So while I was at the LSE, there was an innovation scouting type company. And so I went to work with them for a little while in London. And what they were doing was they call themselves like a startup factory. And so I worked with them, ideated a few startups and helped to like launch them. And I found it super interesting. It played into sort of some of my core, how do I put it? Some of my core leanings, right? My dad is an entrepreneur. I've always had this entrepreneurial streak like throughout my life. And so just seeing that, you could in a structured way ideate, like look at the market, look at where there's a need, and in a structured and very deliberate way, create
mathematical.
Well, not necessarily
or
mathematical, but it's very systematic. Like you can look at a problem or look at the marketplace and see, okay, where is a problem or where is there a need that is not being filled, and then craft a value proposition and develop a startup from that. So I saw that, I found that really, really interesting. And I thought, okay, so why build startups just for these guys? Let me actually try and do one of my own. And back then I was quite involved with the African fashion industry in London. And so I had like huge networks in that space. And I thought, okay, right now there's no sort of, there's no website where I can get, African inspired fashion from. And so that's how I started my sort of first e-commerce startup.
So your first e-commerce startup, that was birthed by something that you saw happened to be a gap in the market.
Exactly.
And you thought how you could sort of take, what you've learned in what happens to be something that came quite, I don't know, is it something that just evoked some sort of passion in you, that you could literally look at something, assess it, and understand how to create systems and processes for that thing in order for it to
absolutely
to
create
grow,
value,
to create value.
Yeah.
So, but how did that then lead you to fashion? Was fashion something that was
well, like
innate
I said
as well?
Yeah. So I used to be quite involved with the fashion industry in London, African fashion.
How?
I knew you were gonna probe.
I know the no. I must know the no's, know the whys and the hows.
Okay, so way back in the day when I was much younger and much slimmer and much prettier, I used to be a model.
Really?
Yes.
We can probably get some of those modelling pictures up.
Lord,
I've got them, but it's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I used to model in the sort of a lot of the African fashion shows in London Fashion Week. I used to like walk the runway, and so I knew a lot of the designers, and I had lots of connections there. And I saw so many beautiful pieces, and I was like, okay, what if I wanted to buy this? And there was just no place, like no central place where people could actually go and find these items. So I said, okay, let me create a platform for them. I think the demand is there because a lot of people turned up for those shows. And I think it was also at a time where, the Aztec print and African prints was becoming trendy. And so I thought, okay, let me create a platform where we can, push out some of these creations that these people are making. And that's how I founded my first e-commerce company. But I call it the first, like I've had multiple.
Well, we're gonna delve into that actually, because that was leading into my. That was you've had 3 that I can think of, three that you've gone public with to a large degree. So after the fashion, and then what happened after that when you went into fashion e-commerce? How long ago? Well, not necessarily how long ago. How long was a journey for that business before you now leaped into perhaps something else?
Okay, so this business, I ran it very much the hard way because I was very much averse to taking investment money until I knew. Well, I don't like to let people down, and I wanted to approach it with integrity. I needed to know that I can do this before I take anybody's money.
And you were quite young as well.
And it was very easy to have gotten funding. Actually, it would have been very easy. But what I did was I bootstrapped. So I used a lot of my savings. I was very good at negotiating, so I was able to get usage of this office space off Bond Street in London, which is prime real estate. Absolutely. And I got that for free from this company that I'd been working with.
Okay.
Which was absolutely amazing.
Leveraging off relationships again.
Leveraging off relationships and trust that I've built while working with them. And they also saw the added value of me being there and being able to continue supporting in, some of the business development stuff that they were doing. I also got interns to help, just to expand my capacity. So bootstrapped everything, did a couple of fashion shows, built this website myself. And we launched this platform. And so I think at this point, I'd focused so much on the product. So the value proposition, getting the fashion items was easy for me because I had those networks. I could build a website because I come from a tech background. The hard part was actually getting the customers right, and especially in a saturated market like the UK. At this point,
definitely is that, isn't it?
Absolutely, there was the ASOS, there was Misguided, all these
brands
big companies
with huge juggernauts of budgets.
Exactly.
That you can't possibly compete with.
Absolutely, they were on TV. They were, in the train stations. They were everywhere. And I couldn't compete, even if I tried. I mean, I started looking into it. We didn't have enough money to be able to do that. And I was trying to, as much as possible, do some things organically and bootstrap. But we just couldn't get the visibility. And then at that point, I think it was around 1 December, we came back to Nigeria for our annual holiday. And then I heard about, Jumia and Konga entering the market. And I was like, oh, because I'd always been thinking about e-commerce in Nigeria, but I'd always been thinking about the barriers to entry and how that would have to be overcome. So the way I was thinking about it was, okay, how can we bring PayPal to Nigeria, for example? Because payments would be an issue. You need to be able to collect payments. And then what about deliveries?
Logistics,
etc. So when I came back and I found out that there was this thing called cash on delivery, I was like, whoa, mind blown. Okay. Okay, that solves my problem. And then also because Jumia and Konga had entered the market, there was this insurgence of 3PLs, third-party logistics companies that were coming up. And so I had a plethora of options that I could choose from. And so I was like, okay, Nigeria, larger market size, larger supply base. We're
talking fashion now, are we? We're still talking about the fashion platform.
Exactly.
Okay.
So larger market size, larger supply base. Let me try and launch it here as well. Yes. So I set up, a team in the UK to keep running the UK site, and then I came to Nigeria.
What year was this?
Gosh, I told you I'm not great with dates.
Just give you an idea. Are we talking sort of 10 years ago?
Maybe 2012, 13.
Oh, okay. So I'm trying to paint a picture I'm trying to visual what the state of Nigeria was in terms of e-commerce at that time.
Sure.
Because I can imagine that when I learned about Jumia and Konga, wasn't when they just arrived. I'm sure they would have been around for maybe a number of years before I knew about them, because obviously I was very new to Nigeria too.
Sure.
So I'm wondering what was what was the readiness of the clientele for that online transaction, even if it is pay on delivery, the connectivity that people need or require to be able to go online in the first place,
Sure.
and purchase. What was the state of things then in terms of the buying behavior of people? Were they going online?
Well, obviously, that was a big problem that Jumia and Konga had to overcome, and they had deep wallets. And so I was very happy and very content by the fact that they had already spent the money required to educate this market, and so I could just piggyback off that. It's perfect.
Fantastic.
So they'd done a lot of, a huge amount of advertising and marketing and educating people on how to order. They removed the barrier to trust by offering cash on delivery so that people felt more comfortable. If they knew that the items would come to them first and they could touch it and feel it and know that, then they could commit to paying. And so that was the way that they entered the market and started to build trust. So it was a lot easier for somebody like me to enter the market. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So just tell me, from the moment you came to Nigeria, and I really want to delve into this part now, because I know that when we are trying these businesses, in as much as you may piggyback off the back of others who have perhaps injected so much funds and resources, it doesn't always equate to success.
Yeah.
Now, when you decided, okay, I'm going to try this out, bring it to that Nigerian market, I'm going to give it my all, I'm going to leverage off the work, some of the groundwork that others have already done already, and I'm going to innovate, and I'm going to bring something to the market that possibly isn't necessarily here yet. What are some of the challenges you faced once you made that decision and through the process onto the point where you decided that, okay, is this working or is it not working?
Sure. The first challenge was actually to register a business. I mean, in England, it was so easy. I just went online, filled in a couple of forms, shebang, there you go. Your company is registered. And I was looking at a couple of payment gateways as well. So I know GTB had a payment gateway, and I was trying to figure out what the requirements were. And they said you needed to have a registered business account in operation for X amount of months with X amount of revenue. I'm like, how can I I'm starting a new business that requires this. Exactly. I don't have the account and I don't have the revenue. So I thought, anyway, while I'm trying to tackle that, let me just start the registration. That's the first requirement for everything else. And so I, asked around, as you do with these things, just ask around. I got a couple of different lawyer contacts, different prices. I eventually just went with one. And it took over 8 months for me to get my certificate. So imagine if I really needed that certificate to set up an account.
In order for you to transact.
Exactly. I'd already been backed up an extra 8 months. So luckily that wasn't the case, but I just felt this is so crippling. And I felt, it's important to create a platform that will make it easier for people to actually, register and get started with a business. But that's later. That's another thing. But yeah, so registered the business eventually. I built the site again, got vendors, was able to, get merchandise to sell. And again, the same issue happened in terms of being able to get visibility, because even the Jumia and Kongas, they had big budgets in terms of marketing. But I worked my networks and I was able to get a couple of radio interviews. I was able to get on TV. I was doing some social media marketing, and we started to get traction to the point that I was experimenting with different products and different promotions, etc. And to the point where we started to break even, and we started to, get...
How long did it take before you could break even in that process?
It was about...
I know you hate me asking you for dates.
No. Yeah, it took about 9 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not bad.
It's not bad.
Considering it took 8 months just to register.
Exactly. So it took about 9 months, started to get traction. And then I thought, okay, so now I've proven to myself that this thing can work. I've been able to reach break-even point. And so if I get money at this point, should be able to market, do a lot more marketing, then I know that it can work and I can deliver value to an investor. And so I started, shopping in the market for investors. And I had a few people who were interested. I had a law firm ready to structure a deal. And then I prayed, and God, like the Jumia opportunity came up, and I was like, God, what do I do? You know, I have investors ready.
So this is where Jumia now were
Exactly.
picking up their radar was now, you were in their radar.
Exactly.
Radar,
so they'd seen what I've been doing with
Mhm.
sugarcane. There was one member of staff that was heading fashion at the time, started speaking to me about, oh, you're going to join Jumia one day. I was like, never.
I'm doing my own thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then ultimately, you know, I prayed about it, and God led me to the Jumia option, which was at that point very confusing for me, because I am someone who is naturally very, like, my natural inclination is to be entrepreneurial, to create value rather than like working for someone. And I'd done that already with my software development job. So
what was the conflict there? Was it a case of I've put in all this hard work to do my own thing? How could I possibly leave my baby and go and work and slave for somebody else?
There were so many things. So the conflict was a combination of what you just mentioned. It was a combination also of, you know, like working for someone versus being an entrepreneur. Like my natural inclination is more towards, you know, being an entrepreneur. And I had investors at the ready. I've proven that this could work. I would have a lot more freedom to execute, etc. And my dream was really to even now it seems so ridiculous. My dream was to really compete with Jumia ultimately. So,
okay.
Yeah. It sounds very ridiculous right now, but
it doesn't sound ridiculous at all, because I'm really trying to understand. At that point when you had that conflict going on in your heart, and you're thinking, okay, do I leave? Do I stay? You know, I've got people who are now basically looking to me to make a very, very important decision, because they're ready to obviously sign the dotted lines.
Exactly.
What made you pick Jumia?
100% led by God. I know it sounds weird. It does.
I don't think it sounds weird at all.
But yeah, I prayed about it, and also at that point, you know, I was I had recently become a Christian, and I was learning about God, and I was, you know, learning to speak and hear from Him. And you know, He met me where I was, because I was I was new to Christianity, and I prayed about it, and God gave me a very, very 1,000,000% clear revelation that I was to go to Jumia. So I couldn't even say, oh, I'm not sure. So it was very, very clear. And at that point, and still now, like in my heart, I completely believe in God, and I'm like, whatever He tells me to do, I'm going to do it.
In business, I think.
In business, in life, in everything. And so I was like, as long as it's God that's leading me, He knows the beginning and He knows the end. I don't know what the future will hold, but He sees everything. And so I was like, I'm going to fully trust it and do what He says. And so I accepted a role at Jumia.
So but what was the process in terms of stepping down from, you know, from the business?
So I was kidding myself in the beginning, thinking, oh, I could, you know, just run it as a side business or something.
My mind was moving towards that direction. I was like, she's definitely trying to run the two at the same time, isn't she?
Yeah. So first week of Jumia, very rude awakening, you know, didn't have time to eat, let alone run another business. So I thought, oh, okay, let me pivot it. So it's not about e-commerce anymore. And it's more about, you know, fashion, consulting or something like that. Also did not have the time. Ultimately, Jumia absorbed all my merchandise. Because I came in as the head of...
You transitioned your merchandise onto the Jumia platform.
Exactly. Because I was brought in to head women's fashion. And so, yeah.
Did you find that the products were still moving on Jumia?
Yeah.
As much as they would have done it on your own platform?
I don't remember comparing, but yeah, they moved on Jumia as well.
And how long were you at Jumia for?
About 4.5 years. Quite a long time.
Ooh,
yeah.
That is a while.
Yeah, so I mean, I was there in different capacities, starting off heading women's fashion, ultimately heading fashion, commercial operations for fashion. And then I moved to new business development. So I don't know if you heard about Jumia Local. So I launched...
Yes.
Yeah. So I launched Jumia Local. I launched Jumia Family Market as well. So that's like the FMCG grocery campaign where you can buy, bulk buy your your supplies, grocery supplies every month.
Are they still doing that? I don't
I'm
think
not
I've
sure.
heard about that in a while. I remember when it popped up, but I don't think it's still. I might be wrong.
Yeah.
If it's still
I'm
going.
not sure if it's still happening, but it was the biggest FMCG campaign at Jumia ever, and they rolled it out in like other African countries because it was so successful.
Made a lot of sense. I remember when I did hear about it. And I think because it's such a huge, your groceries, our day-to-day groceries,
Absolutely.
it's such a huge part of our buying every day as Nigerians, I guess as Africans, as any human being. It made a lot of sense to be on the biggest platform
Absolutely.
at the time, didn't it?
Yeah.
I would be interested to know what's going on with that today, if they're still going
too.
on and what went wrong. All right, so when it's really weird because we had another guest on previous shows, and we were talking about the dip in and out of entrepreneurship versus working for somebody else. And it's always a very interesting transition because you're always going to be conflicted when you have that innate instinct to be an entrepreneur. And I think a lot of us are as Nigerians.
Yeah,
we are actually, we probably have the largest number of entrepreneurs in the whole of Africa, if not the world,
Sure.
In Nigeria. And we'll delve into that, the reason why that is, perhaps on another show. But when you're constantly conflicted like that, and I think it's very difficult as an entrepreneur to always know to trust. And I think in your case, God was very much leading that decision.
1,000,000%.
But in situations where you don't necessarily hear God leading you, I can imagine how difficult it can be to know how to maneuver. I can't imagine it because I think I will always pick the entrepreneurial journey every day because I think I'm just built that way.
Sure.
I like, to be honest, it's because I like to suffer because that really is what it is a lot of the time. But I think it takes a certain degree of maybe wisdom. I don't know if wisdom is the right word, to be able to know what path you need to be on at each stage of your journey.
Yeah.
Now, having gone through the Jumia story and came out 4.5 years later, how do you think that has impacted your journey since Jumia in terms of what you're doing now, what you're going to be doing in the near future?
It was pivotal, actually. For me, in my experience, this is one of the reasons why if God told me to drop everything I'm doing today and go and sell nails, like I would do it. Because, the experience at Jumia was pivotal in shaping what I'm doing today. And I didn't know that at the time, but I got that revelation from God and I trusted it and I moved. And throughout that process, like you say, it was definitely a bit of it was challenging, right? Because there were several times when I wanted to leave Jumia and I'd prayerfully approach it again and God would say, no, stay. That experience at Jumia is central to where I am now. And I didn't know that, which is why I find it, it's sort of increased my faith because I didn't know what, the process of going through Jumia would lead to. But I trusted God when that decision didn't make sense. And because of that, it's built my faith because I know that the things that I have planned for myself, God's plans, he sees the beginning and the end. And so it's, just trusting him and following him opens up opportunities that would not have even entered into my consciousness in the beginning. So, even it's tough though, because during that process, like you said, there's that conflict of, okay, I want to be I'm naturally entrepreneurial. This space, where I am is really cramping. They're not utilizing the fullness of my capabilities. And it just is not aligned with who I am, as a person. And so there were several instances throughout that process where I was asking God, okay, is it time to leave? Is it time to leave? And each time he said, no, stay there, which was tough for me because I was even thinking, it started to eat into my Christian life, eat into my relationships. I really didn't have time for anything else aside from work. It started to affect my health and so many different things. And I thought, okay, surely God would want me to do something else where I'll have more time to spend with him, where I'd be healthier, I'd be able to, develop my important relationships better. But each time he actually led me to stay. And the worst one was I'd finally decided that, okay, I think it's time to go. I had this opportunity where I'd be running a startup incubator in Lagos, which is 1,000,000% aligned with, what I had an interest in. And then also I'd be paid in Forex, in dollars. I was like, you couldn't make this up. I was like, okay, this is a perfect opportunity. Surely God wants me to do this. And then he led me to stay. I'd actually tried to resign at Jumia, which caused the whole kerfuffle. It's the best way to put it. And sort of they refused my resignation. How and all of that.
Possible that your resignation is refused?
It's a bit of a long story, but and then I was like, okay, God, I don't understand, and I prayed about it again, and I had sort of 3 options: either to stay in my current role at Jumia, which I was doing really, really well. I was being successful at it. Like, all the projects that I were running were becoming successful, and I was getting a lot of visibility, like in the Jumia group. I could go for this new opportunity, which was like amazing to me, or I could. They actually offered me a promotion to become the vice president of growth marketing
in Jumia.
Wow. And I was like, marketing care. This is the problem that I had for like for my startups. Exactly, for the last two years. Well, actually, like prior to starting at Jumia, because the startups that I had, I was able to build the product, the business, and the processes, but marketing was the issue, right? I didn't have that experience or expertise, and so I was like, really?
Had you bridged that gap within the time frame you were in Jumia, in terms of, did you have any marketing roles at all?
No.
Oh wow. Now that goes to show how much faith they probably had in your ability at that point.
Yeah, I think what they were looking for was someone who was quite analytical and performance driven. And so whenever I ran a project, I was always looking at like carving out a clear path to deliver on the objectives. And so I think that was an important skill to have in marketing. People think of marketing and think immediately more of the creative side of things. So at this point, I had 3 options, right? So I could stay in the current role that I was occupying at Jumia, which I was really successful at. The projects that I was doing were achieving its objectives. And so I was getting visibility at a group level in the company. And there was this other offer which was incredible and which was really aligned with what I was interested in and wanted to do. And then they offered me a promotion to become the vice president of marketing, growth marketing at Jumia. And I was like, okay. And also bearing in mind that obviously this was a skill that I was particularly bad at historically. Given my experience with my own e-commerce startup, I could build the site, I could build the business, but what was lacking was always the marketing side of things. And so I found it interesting that, that was on the table. And I was praying, I'm praying. I was like, okay, God, since, you're the source of all my decisions, which one should I go with? And I didn't hear anything. To your point about, how do I still know which way to go and how to decide if I'm not hearing, like I don't have clarity on what exactly to do. So I was praying, I wasn't really hearing anything. And I was like, okay, let's default back to my, scientific background. And so I did a weighted average analysis of all the different options that I had and based on like some of my priorities. And on paper, I kid you not, this growth marketing role was the worst on paper. So I was like, okay, don't take it. And so I said, okay, God, I'm not hearing from you, but, this is, based on all the things that are important to me, including spending more time with you, this is like the option that I'm going to take. However, Lord, if I make the wrong decision, please cancel it and reorder my steps. And I said that genuinely from the bottom of my heart. And so one day I proceeded to my CEO's office to try and inform her of my decision to actually stay in my current role. And before I could open my mouth, I hadn't booked a meeting. She didn't know what I was coming in to talk about. But before I could utter a word, she was like, oh, Billie, you need to take the VP of Growth Marketing role. You'll have more scope for impact.
As you walked in to resign.
So I'd already tried to resign and they rejected it. So that kind of eliminated that job offer option that I had. And actually during that time, that offer actually went off the table. So it was now, the options had already been narrowed. And so at this point, it's either stay in your role or like take this new challenge. And I didn't know marketing. I didn't know any of it. And I felt, I'd rather continue to be successful in what I'm doing and know that I can deliver than enter into a completely new space and risk not being able to deliver. And so, I prayed about it. I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to go with. I'm going to tell them that I want to stay in the current role. But if I make the wrong decision, genuinely cancel it and reorder my steps. And so I went in there. She hadn't had any background, no warning of me coming in, no context as to what I was coming in to discuss. And immediately she was like, Billie, you need to take the VP of Growth Marketing role. And I was like, okay.
Completely throws you off, doesn't it?
Exactly. So she explained the rationale behind it, etc. I was like, okay, ma, thank you, ma. And I left and I was just laughing. I was like, Lord, okay. So, because, at this point, I could still reject it. Right. But I spoke to one of my aunties who's an amazing woman. Her name is Mrs. Obi Ibekwe. She's my mentor. She's my sister, my mom, everything in one. Went to speak with her about it. And I was like, Auntie, I don't know what to do. All these options. And, on paper, I don't think it's the right decision to take this promotion. But then I prayed to God and I said, if I make the wrong decision, cancel it and reorder my steps. And she was like, well, it seems to me like he's done exactly that. Because the first, I didn't exactly, I couldn't see it. I was like, oh my God, yes. The first option went off the table. My CEO has eliminated the second option for me. So even this one, that's the worst on paper based on my priorities.
Yes.
And I didn't have any knowledge in it. But it seemed like that is where God was leading me. And I was like, okay, Lord, I submit, and I accepted that role. Just that last year at Jumia, actually it was a year and a half or so. But that was the second to the last role that I held at Jumia, and that was, if out of all my experiences there and all the positions that I held, that was the single most important determining factor in what I'm doing today. Wow. There, I started learning, to close the gap in my knowledge. First of all, when it comes to product and processes, I was able to reinforce my knowledge and my expertise and do it at scale and deliver on that successfully in my previous roles. Now, it was now closing the gap with, the area where I didn't have much expertise or experience. So it was a huge learning curve. I went to Paris. I sat with the team there, just learning from them, because I needed to make sure that, I took the reins. I didn't let the ball drop. And also I had big shoes to fill, because the predecessors in this role, one was a German expatriate. Another one was a Harvard Business School graduate.
Those are very big
shoes. And now this is little Billie, who with no experience and no expertise. And this is, when the Bible says he uses the simple things to confound the wise, that was literally the testimony of my journey, right? And so I went in there and I knew that, baseline, I can't let the ball drop. And so I went in there with that mentality, had to learn a lot very, very quickly. It was very, very tough. There were times when I'd go to sleep 4 a.m., wake up 7 a.m., back to work. Took a massive toll on my health and all of that. But for it all, long story short, throughout my tenure there, we never missed targets, which was incredible.
Unprecedented in the history of Jumia, or? Well,
it's incredible, because you know what it takes to not miss targets.
I know, I'm a manufacturer. I know, I can imagine what it takes, because it's not an easy thing.
It's not an easy thing.
To
because
sustain.
When I had to be actively monitoring on a daily basis, even throughout the day, what the performance is. If I saw that there was a gap versus our run rate of where we should be, I had to mitigate. I had to start launching initiatives to close that gap before it turned into something big. So it was very much actively being on top of the performance, which was it was an incredible experience. I learned a huge amount about growth and about marketing, and not realizing what I was learning.
Yes.
And accruing that knowledge. I held one more role after that, which was the vice president of partnerships and innovation. And then I left Jumia after that. But when I left, it was just okay, finally God had allowed me to leave. His company.
Having learned the things, it's because I'm going back, and I want to just take you back just a little before we move forward.
Sure.
When you were running your own fashion e-commerce, marketing was very much the weakness. That's what you said. 100%. So now you're forced into this new role with Jumia, where you're forced to learn marketing, and you find yourself excelling.
Yeah.
Strange,
amazing.
Isn't it?
Because the same God who led me to that, he made sure that I had everything available. I didn't think that I had it.
This is what
He just pulled it out of me.
It pulled it out of you, but he put you in a position where you're also able to soak up everything you did not know when you were trying to do it on your own.
Absolutely.
So now you've gone from this thing failed, when I was trying to obviously use my own knowledge and insight or the little exposure I had, and now positioned me where you're now cushioned with a machine that you can plug into for all the support you possibly need, and vice versa, also soak up all that knowledge. When was the realization for you that was predestined, that you, because for me it sounds that it must have been, because there was no reason why they felt you should go into that role, haven't had no experience, let alone a VP role, right?
Exactly.
So obviously you were embedded into the company already, so you knew the operational side of how the business worked.
Exactly. But
now you're trying to specify in an area that obviously was something that was quite
technical.
Not technical is the word that I'm looking for. I think what I'm thinking, something that was already a challenge for you, that you probably felt that this isn't for me because I'm a failure in this particular thing.
Absolutely.
So you find yourself in that place. When did you do that connection that, wait a minute, wow, how did this...
I think, I was so busy, I didn't really have time to think.
Wow.
And I was just making, anytime... with everything that I do, I try to approach it with a mindset of delivering value, of having integrity, to make sure that if I say I'm going to do this, I'm doing it. So no matter what it takes, I'll pull out all the stops to make sure that I deliver on what I say I'm going to deliver.
What do you think you did differently in Jumia that you hadn't done in your own platform?
My own business.
Pertaining to marketing.
So first of all, I think it was the idea that marketing was just, let's try a few initiatives and let people hear about us, and then it works. Jumia gave me the understanding that it's very systematic, and it's not just about marketing, but it's about growth. So on the first hand, you need to let people become aware of what you're doing and aware of your products and services, but you need to engineer that all the way through the value chain. Otherwise, you can't actually deliver on the growth at the bottom line. So when I was managing performance, for example, if I saw that, okay, my revenue targets, I was behind, I was maybe on 90% or 80% run rates to hit my revenue targets, then I would say, okay, so I do analysis to say what is driving that. So revenue is a function of, the number of customers, the value of orders, average value of orders, and the average quantity of transactions each customer takes. So now look at any of one of those metrics and see which one is lower. Maybe the order values are lower because more people are buying on a competitor's site, for example. And so I would run a campaign to say, okay, for orders over 30,000 Naira, you get free shipping. So I incentivize higher basket sizes to make sure I close the gap. And so that was more also making sure that could be executed on the process side, and financially it made sense. Do you understand? It was moving just beyond the marketing. Right. So it really, that kind of opened my eye that marketing is very, very deliberate. Also looking at the function of the type of business that you're in. It's not just about just doing anything. It was an online business, so you need to get people online. And so I wasn't doing enough of online marketing, and also online marketing to drive awareness. I was just doing a lot of things that were engaging the existing followership who were already aware, and I was not doing enough to grow that base. So I learned a huge amount about growth and how growth is structured. So it wasn't just about marketing, but really about driving growth across the entire value chain.
So is it safe to say that it's not always just about money then? or the amount of
Jumia had a lot
budget
of
you have.
money.
Well, it's one thing to have the money, but it's another thing to know how to make it work for you.
1,000,000%.
So would you say that that was very much knowing the relationship between the two, and now knowing how to marry them together, that was the winning formula?
Absolutely.
Or is the winning formula?
Even more so now outside of Jumia, actually. Because with a lot of the startups that we support with growth, one of the first things that was a challenge for African startups was, access to funding to actually grow their business. Now that funding gap has closed because there's a lot of capital entering the market. However, these startups that are getting access to this capital, they don't know how to channel it into bottom line growth. So that's the gap that we're filling now, is really helping them to understand, okay, so these are the resources that you have. This is how you can channel them in a deliberate and scalable way to achieve growth for your business.
In terms of maximizing the return on investment?
Not just return on investment, but I mean, for a particular investment, there's a value that they're supposed to deliver, whether, it's different for different segments, right? Or different sectors. So for e-commerce, for example, is more of a long-term play. So what you want to see is actually growth in market share, which might not be revenue. Okay, so but for another type of business, maybe a financial business, then revenue and profitability is important from the get-go. So it's really driving on whatever the strategic objective is. And channeling those resources towards achieving that.
Is any resource too little? Or does this theory still apply regardless of what your budget or your access to funds is?
Okay, so when I think about growth, I like to think about it like Google Maps. And I tell you why. So growth is like, first of all, you need to make an assessment of where you are. So this is my current location. This is what I'm doing, and these are the results from what I'm doing. And then you have a destination in mind, right? So you plug in that destination. This is where I want to get to. And then you plot a map, a route to that destination. And that's what we do with growth modeling, looking at analytics, looking at different ways that we can achieve what the objective is. So with one route, it could require a lot of money, right? And maybe the shortest path could require a lot of funding. But there could be other routes, if you don't have access to that amount of funding, that you could take. It might be longer, it might be a different direction, but it will still get you to the destination. And also along the way, for example, if you've run out of money, like Google Maps will redirect you. Yes. Right? It's the same thing. You go back to your growth model, look at where you are, look at the destination, and find another path to it. So growth is a very systematic process of driving towards a strategic destination, and it always works.
So I'm trying to position myself as somebody who's listening to this podcast at the moment and thinking, this all sounds really good, guys, but you're talking Jumia, we're talking big time. For those who don't know, Jumia Africa is very much like, how do I describe it? Can we go as far as saying it's the Amazon of Africa?
Exactly.
Yes, so it's enormous, and they're not just in Nigeria, right? Because now we have Jumia Global and things like that. So when we're making comparisons, your company is very much a tiny company. You're listening to this and you're thinking, how can I basically set out my Google map to success with my my business growth when I literally have nothing?
Sure. I
have nothing. Is it still possible for me to set out that agenda with little to no money at all? And how might I go about doing that without to engage a company like yours to say, we don't have any money, guys, but can you set out a roadmap for us? And then sort of taking us along that journey? Or is it completely out of the question, even outsourcing to a company, or even getting, advice from a company like yours? Or is it something that they can possibly look to trying to set out themselves and then starting off small? How would it possibly work?
So what I'm talking about actually is less so for Jumia. So the Jumia experience showed me that, there is a process that you can use to drive a specific agenda, and if you're not meeting it, there's always another way to get there. But this whole idea of modeling your growth, starting off, if the routes that you're taking is not working, there's other paths to it. This is one that we actively use currently with the startups we support. So my current role is as a chief growth engineer at alGROWithm, which is a growth agency that I set up, helping African tech startups and SMEs with driving growth for their business. So, and this is the technique that we use with them, right? So they might, in the beginning, that's part of the modeling part, right? So, on Google Maps, you can choose a route that has less traffic, right? It might take longer, but you don't want to sit in traffic, or you might avoid toll gates, etc. So the initial plan is really a lot of analysis to understand where you are and all the different options. The roadblocks could be some resource constraints on your side, maybe lack of money, maybe lack of expertise or people who are able to execute. It could be a number of different variables. When we plug that in and say, okay, so given your context and given what you have available, this is what is possible. And then we start on that journey. And then we're always tracking, okay, where are we? Like Google Maps, it tells you where you are on the path. And if we see we're deviating from that, we now go back to the board and say, okay, what is the issue? What else? Is there another route? But it's always a pretty systematic process of always getting you to the destination. And it's possible because I did it at Jumia. We never missed targets, like I said. And if you take that same mindset and approach and adapt to the different variables, it's still achievable.
Okay, fantastic. So if having gone through that map, because really what we're talking now about is really understanding the data, collecting as much of the data as possible, and then reevaluating and assessing that data and trying to see clues wherever you might find them that will tell you, okay, this is where we are, this is what's working, that's what's not working. So that data analysis, is that something that somebody in a startup can start implementing very early in their stage, or is it very complex to the point where you need an expert to come in? Because it's almost like, when do you start implementing that in your business? Because most times when people want to start a business, the first thing they think is, I need a website. And it's funny, we were talking about this earlier. It's like you set up a website, but is that website functional? Is it doing what you need it to do? And so when you're going about investing the little resources you have into such things like websites and all of that, and marketing on social media, but there's no real there's no design of how you want your customers to move per se. For me, for example, we have a website, but a lot of the things you're talking about today is maybe alien is not the word. I think probably has been at the back of my mind that this is something we definitely need to look at and really sort of optimize. But again, it's not my area of expertise. So the question is, at the point when you're setting up this fancy website, at the point where you are, investing your money in, certain social media advertising and things like that, and you don't have the data on what is working versus what is not working, even if you're making tremendous amount of sales, does not necessarily mean that those things are what's necessarily directly contributing to them. So I guess my question really is, at what point should you be looking at collating this data and setting yourself up for data analysis so that you can study how your customers are navigating through your business per se? Sure.
When you say data analysis, people's brains automatically start, overheating because it sounds so
it's overwhelming.
Complicated. But it doesn't have to be. If you're running, you have a Zobo, a business selling Zobo, for example. Are you writing? Are you recording? How many people are being aware of you? Like, are you tracking? How many inquiries you're getting from social media. You can write that down, right? It's just important to be gathering insights about all the interactions that customers are having with you for you to get a full picture. Also, it's important to measure each initiative versus the objective that initiative is trying to drive. Earlier we were talking about your website, for example, right? And for high value transactions like luxury furniture or even real estate, for example, as much as it's possible to make those transactions happen online, you'll find a lot that people don't do that. They might come to the website just to know that you're there and build and have the trust that it's a real company, and then take the rest offline. But if you're measuring, your website and the activities that you're doing there against, a conversion objective, you get the wrong picture. You think that, people aren't actually transacting on there, so what use is it? But actually, in the entire customer's conversion journey, it plays a part because they go from awareness to consideration to conversion. First of all, they need to be aware of your existence, right? And once they're aware of your existence, there needs to be they need to build trust that, okay, this is a legitimate company. They also want information about, whether your service offerings or your product offerings meets their need. And so the website and your social media plays that part. And so the information that you put there it's aiding them to consider, and it's influencing their buying or purchase decision. And so even though you can't directly measure whether it's linking directly to sales, it plays a part in that conversion journey.
In the process.
Exactly. Yeah. So what you need to be doing is measuring each thing that you're doing versus the objective that it's trying to drive. If it's trying to drive an awareness objective, you don't count, how many sales came from it. You need to count how many people saw it and now are aware of us.
How many likes, how many comments, things of that nature.
So how many people are engaged? So if they're trying to drive a consideration objective, like how many people are actually engaging with us and reviewing our offerings and what we're about and what the brand is about, then you can look at likes and things like that. If you're looking at awareness, how much is my followership growing? So you need to always measure what you're doing versus the specific objective. Otherwise, you get a warped picture.
Is it possible to do multiple, to sort of position an activity for multiple outcomes? Is it possible you put an ad together? Is it possible for you, is it realistic perhaps, I should say, to want to drive awareness and sales and send a message all at once?
No, typically it's possible, but it's not optimal. Right? You can't, and it also depends on the type of product, right? So if you think about high value transactions, the consideration timeline is a lot longer. It might take several weeks or months versus, I'm hungry, I need to decide what I want to eat now and make a purchase right now. So the consideration timelines are different, and you can't expect it with one interaction that, if someone will go from being aware of you to actually transacting always. It's possible, but it's very rare. So you need to have initiatives focused on each of those different distinct objectives and driving people through that journey.
So basically, it's safe to say you should be focusing on one thing at a time.
Not necessarily one thing at a time, but you need to make sure you're covering all three, and you have initiatives or tactics or content that is going out to drive each of those distinct objectives separately.
Yeah. Not in one activity.
I'll give you an example. So if we're looking at, radio as a channel, right? If I wanted to drive awareness, I would put a radio jingle. So because that drives repetition, you can get a lot of exposure with the repetition that it drives. But then if I wanted to drive consideration, then I'll do a radio interview where, you talk about some of the value propositions, you talk about some of the questions that customers might have, give them information about pricing, why it's better than the competitors, and so they're considering versus just an awareness campaign. So the same channel can be used in different ways for two different distinct purposes. And you always, when you think about growth, you have to think about it in that way. Otherwise, you're measuring against wrong objectives, you're getting the wrong picture, and you're also not very clearly driving people through this conversion journey. That's typically what happens in most businesses you'll come across.
I think it probably happens in the majority of us. And I think it's because, I think when you're sort of starting up a business, it's that idea that you can do it all yourself. Because obviously most times we have cash constraints. We don't have budgets, and we think to ourselves, well, if they can do it, what they're doing that's so special, I can put an ad on social media, and then we find a lot of the time. For instance, let me give you an example where, we might do an ad for a particular product, a beautiful chair or sofa, and what your intention with that ad is to make sales. But what you find is that by the time you look at the little bit of data you might find on social media, you find that there's no sales, nobody's purchased that item.
Well,
but what you find, lots of likes, an awful lot of comments. You might get a couple of shares here and there, or people sharing it with their friends and family and all of that. But when your intention, your initial agenda was to make a sale, where you've put the gorgeous piece of furniture there, you've put the price point, you say, you give a call to action, buy today for a great, sale or whatever it may be, and people are only just sharing and liking, but not a single sale. How do you assess that data?
Sure.
Where do you go back to? Do you go back to the guy who put the ad together? Do you go back to the messaging? Do you go back to the graphics? What are you assessing in that sort of situation?
So with growth, what you do is you analyze, right? Based on your analysis, you come up with a hypothesis. So you're like, based on what I'm seeing in this data, I think XYZ is the problem. And if I do XYZ, I can tackle that problem. And so with that type of example, I'm looking, first of all, at what content am I putting out and what objective am I trying to drive? If I'm trying to drive more conversions, right, I need to assess my entire funnel. How many people are aware? How many people are considering? And how is that funneling through to conversion? So if, for example, 1% of the people on social media or coming from social media are converting, then I know if I wanted to get 10 people converting, I know how much more I need to be aware.
Okay.
Right. And so I would look at that ad as well and say, okay, what was the objective I was trying to drive? So typically, social media platforms make it very easy for you to boost. This is the one thing that I advise people against doing, especially because it's a journey that when you take the customer journey or the user journey where they guide you through to boost, they make it so easy for you by eliminating some of the control features that make it more of an advanced type of activity. And so you have less control. And typically when you boost, the objective that you're driving is an engagement objective, not to drive traffic or to actually drive sales or lead acquisition. And so you just go through the default, you click next, and you've added money, you've boosted this thing, and all you're driving is more likes and shares for Facebook. So typically, first of all, if you're going to do an ad, I wouldn't go through that user flow of boosting. You create an ad from scratch, and this is one of the services that we offer at alGROWithm as well, right? If you don't have the expertise, you can always outsource that, right? Creating an ad right from scratch with a very, very clear objective. If it's to drive awareness, is driving awareness, and how are you measuring that? Maybe with impressions or with number of clicks or web sessions. If it's to drive interaction or consideration, then you can boost it, or then you can try and drive like more engagement, like more likes, more video views, etc.
Yes.
If it's to drive conversion typically happens either offline, or if it's online, then there's an e-commerce path, and you can see
There must be a landing page of some sort for you to.
It can be, yes.
Okay.
So if it's offline, for example, there needs to be a clearly defined sales process to take those leads that are coming in to actually converting. And then you need to map what those steps are and see, okay, how are people funneling through?
Yeah.
For real estate, for example, it could be once a lead comes in, you give them all the information they need. Then they need to come for a viewing. Then after the viewing, you send them like an invoice, and then they pay. So for example, if you see like a lot of people are coming for the viewing, but then not actually paying, moving through to the invoice, that's where you need to optimize.
Yes.
Other people will just say, oh, we need to advertise more. But actually, you've identified where in the funnel the problem is.
There's a breakage somewhere.
Exactly. And then you start to experiment. So my hypothesis is if I give people champagne during the viewing, I think more people will be likely to convert. And I'll test that. And if that doesn't work, I go back to the drawing board. My hypothesis is if I bring the pricing down a little bit, maybe for 48 hours,
Yes.
and they commit, then I can increase conversions. I test that. And I continue testing until I hit and solve that problem.
So what's the runway of this sort of testing? How long should you ideally as a business be testing these hypotheses, as you sort of go along?
Yeah.
You've looked at something, you've looked at the data, I'm going to now test it, or I'm going to implement something else wherever I'm finding breakages, and I'm going to just, how long are you supposed to keep this testing process going?
Forever. That's the whole sort of approach of growth. So we define growth as a mindset and a process. The mindset that growth needs to be engineered across the value chain, not just in marketing. So when you're thinking about growth, you need to think about how that marketing is funneling through to the product and into operations, right? And then the systematic process of driving a company towards is strategic objectives, right? So analyzing, knowing where you are, that Google Maps type of idea, like making a map as to where you need to get to, identifying where the issues are, the bottlenecks, maybe the roadblocks, okay, and saying, if I do X, Y, Z, I think I can pass this roadblock, right? And then you continually experiment until you find something that addresses it or that improves it, and then you move on to the next bottleneck, right? So it's a systematic thing that's ongoing. It never stops. You're always continually optimizing your funnel. Market dynamics might change, that might bring in certain issues. For example, COVID, right? So with the COVID situation, market dynamics changed in favor of some businesses and against some businesses. Those that it changed in favor of would have struggled with handling that amount of growth operationally, because they wouldn't have thought about how that funnels through from marketing or awareness into actually operations and the ability to deliver the service or product, right? They wouldn't have factored that in or anticipated that. So it's important, like you continue, it's an ongoing thing. Market dynamics might change, company dynamics might change, but it's an ongoing process of always identifying where there's an issue, never giving up. Like you're always testing. You make a hypothesis. You might disprove that hypothesis and go back to the data and say, okay, maybe that's not the issue. Maybe it's further up. And then you continue testing until you reach a solution.
Testing, reviewing, implementing,
and
changing,
then
tweaking.
And then when you find something that works, you systemize. So the test should always be as quickly and as cheaply as possible, right? So for example, I wouldn't just change the entire policy in the example that I gave. I would say, okay, let's try it with the next 3 customers and see if it improves
if it's the
things.
same across board,
exactly,
perhaps, or is it just isolated to that?
Isolated, so we can isolate and say, okay, let's try this new tactic with 3 customers and see if more of them convert. If not, okay, so let's try another tactic with another set of customers, and then when something works, we can say, okay, now from now on, we're going to do this with all customers. So you now systemize it once you've had a positive result from a growth experiment. And
is that time scale for systemization, should there be a time frame for that, or is it different across every single time?
Exactly. For me, for example, in Jumia, when I launched Jumia Family Market, I ran a couple of iterations until we were starting to hit our objectives. And then, once that was hit, then we systemized it. It got rolled out across all the other Jumias in all other African countries. So that's systemizing, because we've tested it in one environment. We've seen that it works. And then now we need to replicate that across the rest of the portfolio.
So how long has alGROWithm been? You're
doing well.
Oh, my sister.
I see the cogs working when you're trying to pronounce it.
Honestly, it's a bit of a tongue twister for me. I'm not sure if you guys have picked it up today, but it is. So in as much time as alGROWithm has been in the market, are they things that you have sort of discovered through your journey in terms of working with so many different clients that you find many other businesses should, is it systemize? Would that be the word to sort of call it? Because I know this, I don't want to say the Nigerian market is completely different from the rest of the world, but it's a whale of its own, right? And I imagine that many things that possibly can and cannot work in this market, or haven't worked in this market, isn't necessarily the same across the different, whether it's your experience from the UK or anything like that. But as a business, as an entrepreneur because I don't think anybody can avoid growth. Nobody can really avoid the tech implementation into their businesses now, especially with COVID-19. But is there anything that you would say should be across board for entrepreneurs sort of trying to grow their businesses in this market, specifically in terms of their growth plans? What sort of things should we really be looking at?
I would not say there's any one particular tactic to use. In fact, I'm very averse to that. You hear the term growth hacking a lot, and I really dislike that term.
Well, what's growth hacking?
It infers that, a tactic that has worked for one company, you can just copy and paste it and it'll automatically work for yours. And it's not the case. I lean more towards growth engineering, like a systematic way, like given that process I just described of deliberately and systematically achieving, like tackling problems, opening up growth bottlenecks and achieving growth for your company. That's a lot more sustainable, is a lot more deterministic and predictable. I've seen a lot of companies, they see a hack that a company tried in the West and they try to implement it and it doesn't work.
But there's a lot of copycat. The reason why I asked the question is because I see a lot of copycat from businesses here. Something works for one company. Next minute, I'm not going to mention what, but I'm sure probably some of you have probably noticed something's worked for one company and they've had huge amount of growth or exposure. And the next minute you see somebody else is copying it or they're trying to sort of disguise it. But we can see through it a lot of the time.
You can see through it, and also it doesn't always deliver the same results because the internal dynamics in the company where it was implemented and also the external dynamics of the market can be very different, and that impacts how effective these hacks are. So I take a preference to looking at the current standing of the existing business in its environment and understanding where they are and mapping out a route that is possible for them, given their resources, giving their infrastructure, as opposed to trying to hack that might not work in a different context.
What if it does work?
If it does work, you're
keep
lucky.
doing it.
Keep doing it 100%. It's possible to test something, but I wouldn't just take a hack and say, oh, this is what we're going to do. You can maybe say, okay, these guys have tried it, and because our problem is in the same area, we can test that to see if it would solve this problem. And then if it works, then you systemize it. So that's the approach I would take. And I would say one of the things that I find that a lot of startups in Africa and businesses in Africa generally need is really this education and this orientation of growth. Because people, they think they know what they're doing, like I did, when I was running my e-commerce startup. I thought, going on social media and posting was doing marketing and going on TV and stuff.
Most of us do.
Yeah, that's the default. But I would really encourage people to really get educated in what growth is. And we have a course, actually. We have growth engineering courses and growth basics courses, which is on our website.
You're teaching businesses how to perhaps go about their own growth strategies on their own.
First of all, the basics course just helps you to get an understanding of what growth is. Understanding that, there are distinct steps in this journey that a user is taking from becoming aware of you to actually patronizing you, and understanding how to engineer their journey through that. I'm talking about all the resources, the tools, the analytics infrastructure, the growth infrastructure, the techniques, the behavioral economics or choice architecture tactics that you can use to drive certain user behaviors. All of that we teach people so that they can...
So it's a science.
It's very much a science.
Because a lot of us do assume, even in 2020, a lot of us do assume it's luck.
No.
I'm just going to keep it real. A lot of us do, because you find that some brands, you hear these stories, some brands come out, or a particular product or a particular company comes out, they do one thing and it's just jackpot. All of a sudden they're an overnight success.
There's some that are lucky, but you can't always replicate luck.
But the question, I guess, is, are they really lucky, or they just discovered what works very quickly and they were able to sort of, tweak and make changes very, very quickly according to whatever's happening in their environment, and then run with it? Is it really luck? It's just we just don't see what's
behind it. It could be either or, right? So there's some people who, by luck, have access to the right people or the right resources to be able to achieve that type of success. In other cases, like you say, is very much engineered, and because you don't see the workings behind it, you don't realize how much goes into it, right?
It's a lot. I think there's a lot that goes into this growth strategy stuff that people don't really understand. And I liked what you said. It's very much about orientation and just educating.
100%.
It's not just a case of just going on Facebook, doing a quick boost ad and thinking all of a sudden you're going to blow, or your brand's going to be known by everybody, and it would always just because you got 100 likes doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to convert, translate into sales. I would know, because we get on social media you have a lot of people liking your stuff, sharing it. Oh my god, this is beautiful. And I'm behind the phone going, then buy. Can you just click and pay?
So one of the things that we have on our website as well is a growth quiz, because people think that they know, they think that they understand marketing, they think that they understand growth. And one of the things that we've put together is almost like a fun quiz where you can go there. There are a couple of questions that it asks about growth, and you can test and see the extent of your knowledge or understanding of growth. Just almost like a litmus test for yourself, so okay, do I really need to learn more about this and invest in learning and researching more about this, or do I really know what I'm doing? Because people typically think they do, but it's very much not the case in actually every single business that we've worked with.
So beyond the training that you guys are offering at alGROWithm, what sort of other services alGROWithm sort of offer to businesses who perhaps don't really know,
Sure.
beyond coming for the train? How long is the trainings for?
The training, so the basics training is a day.
Okay.
The intermediate is for 2 days.
Okay, so beyond the 2 days, you've gone there, you've been inspired, you've learned all this content, all this information, thinking, wow, I'm educated now, I'm informed. Now I want to sort of really implement what I've learnt. Is there any hand holding that you guys do over alGROWithm in terms of actually, because I imagine this thing is beyond just that 2 days. I think the 2 days is really when you open somebody's eyes.
Exactly.
Is that correct?
Exactly.
And then beyond that, when you really want to sort of go through that process and that growth strategy and actually go to the point where you're able to implement effectively, what sort of service do you guys sort of offer for that journey as well?
Okay, so where we've seen a gap in a couple of areas, to some extent, the growth training and orientation helps the entire organization to really understand the process and the structure that they need to drive a growth agenda in their business. But typically, they lack expertise in particular areas. So digital marketing. So they might have tried their hands with boosting ads and things like that, and they see that it doesn't work or deliver the objectives that they're trying to drive. And so they bring us on board to help them with that. We clarify exactly what the objectives are. We can build a model to say, okay, if you want to achieve this objective, this is how much you need to spend, and this is what we believe can be delivered. We look at their data, we look at their analytics to really build what that route will look like. And we're able to help them with executing that. So I have a team of digital marketers, content creators that learn they've been trained on optimizing content or strategies to achieve particular objectives. And we're very much about, active performance management, similar to the way that I did it at Jumia. So looking at, where we need to get and where, tracking how are we performing versus the objective. So we're actively managing that to ensure that we always deliver on the objective that the customer is trying to drive. So there's that service, and it's like a monthly retainership. If you want to run a campaign for 1 month, you can just retain us for just that month. But if you want, us to manage it on an ongoing basis, we're able to do that as well. There's also social media, right? So we found that social media is an important part of, the consideration part of the customer journey. They need to build trust and convey information that will help them to make a buying decision. And this is quite an arduous task, and you can't always see the immediate benefits. And it also is expensive for a company to run typically, because you need to hire a graphic designer, and between anything from, 100,000 to 300K. You need to hire a content marketer to actually generate the ideas and the content and publish it, etc. And so that aggregated cost can be anything between 300 to 500K. And so we said, okay, let's create this service where we can support people with that. So we can manage your social media. We do all the content. We curate the content strategy. We publish and deploy all the content according to the prescribed schedule. We manage the performance actively as well for a lot less. So it's about 150,000 per month. So it's cheaper than, actually trying to recruit the staff internally, and also a lot more effective.
So sorry to cut you off. So if you were sort of looking for a more affordable way of creating that, your content journey and the process and how you want to sort of communicate with your customers on social media, and then you're approaching a company like yours, I think we're very much moving into that space right now where you feel like the more content you have, the better. That
Not
seems
always,
to be.
but
I think it's weird, because I think Nigeria is, in my opinion, at least I feel like we're trying to catch up to the rest of the world in terms of our social media marketing and our communications and comms in general. And what you're finding across board, many different. All these sorts of social media gurus and social media marketers. The rhetoric is at the moment is create lots and lots of content so that you can because now, video marketing was very much a phenomenon when it first started. And a lot of companies were right at the top. and everybody else was kind of like, oh, what's going on there? They're really doing really well. But now everybody's catching up. Everybody now is creating video marketing content and all of that. So it's becoming more and more saturated. Sure. And at the level and the speed in which we're bombarded with information these days, it seems that you have to compete more and more for that relevance. And as Nigeria sort of catches up with the rest of the world, there's this pressure to create just to stay at the forefront of people's minds, because everybody is bombarded and the attention span is reducing every day. So when you're outsourcing to a company like that, so it's not so much about the volume of, but what would you say it's more focused on?
It's very, very important to keep focused on the objective. It's never about the volume. You can't
get lost in the traffic.
Don't get lost in all the noise and what is going on. So if you think about, let's take if you think about a hospital, for example, right? They have an Instagram page. It's not important to have a lot of content on that page. It's just important to have a presence enough to create social proof. Where they see that it's a legitimate institution, and there's that trust there, enough information to position yourself as relevant and as an expert in this sector that you're in. So you need to keep focused on the objective and just do things that drive the objective. Not trying to follow what everybody else is doing.
Frequency is not a big part of that?
Frequency can be determined by a number of different factors, right? What type of platform is it? What type of business is it, right? What are their infrastructure and capabilities? Like, how much bandwidth do they have to be able to create content on a regular basis? How much does social media play into the conversion journey? Is it important, or are there other ways to drive it that are more valuable? So there are a number of different factors, right? It's not just about social media. You can drive consideration in a number of different ways. It's really figuring out which one is the most effective in your overall sector, for your business, and your particular conversion journey. So it's very much a science, and it's very much tailored to the context of the individual company and its nuances. But yeah, so we do that, and then the other service that we have is for startup accelerators or venture capital funds. So these guys are obviously investing heavily in these startups. But they're finding that, a lot of them don't know how to channel those resources to driving bottom line growth. Yes. And this is where we come in. So we manage the portfolio at Founders Factory Africa, and also we're growth partners with Microtraction in Nigeria. So we look at the startups and we deliver support to them, like on a weekly basis, looking at their data, supporting them with analyzing, understanding where the bottlenecks are, supporting them with ideas like hypotheses, experiments that they can run. We help them set up their growth infrastructure as well. And, along with the accelerator themselves, define what the OKRs, the objectives and key results for that time in the accelerator is, and making sure that we're driving towards that. So we do that for, accelerators and VC funds as well, to make sure that they're getting value from the investment that they're making.
Do you know what, really? We definitely don't have enough time on Susu to cover all of this, because like we've already said in this conversation today, that there's a formula, that not necessarily a formula, but there's a science to this. Yes. And it takes a heap lot more than what people assume it takes. And I think it's probably getting a lot more complex as time goes on, as the market of social media marketing grows and develops and evolves over time. So it's to stay relevant, it's become more and more difficult because of all the traffic. So I guess you need to be more specific in the agendas and the goals and your approach every day. And there's a science to that, and there's a certain level of expertise to that. And we cannot begin to dissect all of that in one session.
100%.
But you know what? It's been an absolute pleasure having you. We're definitely going to we're going to keep the conversation going off camera, and I would love to have you on Susu again for another episode. So thank you so much for coming on. It's been wonderful just chatting with you. I've learned tons today, and I'll continue to learn.
Come for the training if you think you've learned tons.
Funny enough, as you said that, I was thinking I need to be on that in that training, and I was thinking to myself, if I go for the training, can I then train my staff? And I was like, nah, it's okay. We all need to be in it together so that we can really understand how to set about our own strategies in growth. But before we sort of end the episode, I just want to sort of find out from you. how might people reach you guys at alGROWithm, and you know, somebody is thinking about their own growth journey and how to possibly embark on it, and maybe even get an extra help to even identify what that growth journey looks like, because many of us don't. All we know is we want to grow, but we have no idea how.
Yeah.
How can somebody reach you guys to sort of try that, basically get that conversation going, and get the expertise that they desperately require?
Sure, you can reach out to us on social media. So we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. And our handle is alGROWithm, alGROWithm. So you can reach us that way, and we'll be happy to, to take the conversation further. You can also email us at contact@algorowithm.com. We have a website as well. I don't know if you permit me, because I should know the number off by heart, but I don't. But we have a WhatsApp business line as well, so you can reach out to us on WhatsApp, because we know people love WhatsApp.
We'll definitely drop it at the bottom of the video as well, so that people
would be great.
Can have easy access and just get through to you guys, because we all need it. That's if anything we've learned from this session is that we need to take it more seriously. Our growth strategy has to be at the top of all our agendas.
Absolutely.
Because if you're not growing, you're basically dying, aren't you?
Exactly. And people seem to think it's, some tough sort of magic, but there's a very systematic and orderly way of getting it, and in a very deterministic way. And that's what we're trying to teach people, and that's what we're trying to support startups with as well. The WhatsApp number is 0808 549 6218. So reach out to us in any one of those ways, and we'll be happy to take the conversation further.
Fantastic. So there you go, guys. Thank you so much for tuning into Susu podcast today, because I know you can be watching any podcast in the world, but you decided to watch ours. I hope that you have learned as much from Billie as I have today. And to keep the conversation going with alGROWithm and to reach out to them, all their details are going to be at the bottom of this video. Make sure you reach out, make sure you message them on WhatsApp as well. But more importantly, make sure you share this podcast, because as much as I've learned, I'm sure, and as much as you've learned, I'm also sure that there's people out there, entrepreneurs out there, who would gain an awful lot of insight, an awful lot of knowledge from this episode as well. So make sure you share, make sure you comment, make sure you like, and have a wonderful week. And as per usual, don't forget to be extraordinary in the way that only you can be. Take care, guys. Bye.